Hello students, today we are going to discuss about non-metals. So previous two lectures we studied about metals and we saw the definition about the metals, and we also studied the how the metals were discovered. Like gold was the first metal to be discovered. We saw the definition of metal, and then we also studied about the properties of metals, and we discussed some 10 prominent properties. So today let's understand what are non-metals. So basically, substances which are electronegative in nature, that means they have tendency to gain electron. So if you see, this is the exact opposite definition of metal, because metal definition, if you remember, they are electropositive and non-metals are electronegative. How they are electropositive? Metals have tendency to lose electron. Metals believe in giving and non-metals believe in taking. So metal lose electron and they become electropositive, while as non-metals gain electron and they become electronegative. So this is about how we can have, this is the proper definition of non-metal and metals. And we have already studied, I have already shown you this structure, how the proton and neutron, they form the nucleus of an atom, and how proton is positive charged and neutron is neutral, and electron, who is negatively charged, continuously revolves around the nucleus. So now so for example, if you take an atom, if you take this atom and if you consider this as a positive charges, if you consider this as a positive charges, this black one, and blue one, if we consider them the negative charges. So now if one more electron is gained by this substance, so it will become more negative. So that's how it becomes electronegative. So this is the concept how they become more electronegative. And for example, the prominent are carbon, sulfur, oxygen. There are many non-metals. Obviously, compared to metals, we will see future periodic table also, how metals are more in number and non-metals are less in number than the metals. And the example is carbon, sulfur, oxygen, and hydrogen. And most of the non-metals are solid or gaseous. Most of the non-metals are solid or gaseous, but as you know, there are always exceptions. So here also we have exception, that is bromine, which is liquid. Although it is a non-metal, but it is liquid. So in liquid state. So let's go ahead. Now we'll discuss about why to study, basically why to study non-metals. So basically, why to study non-metal? If you see a tree, what tree does, basically, if you see, tree takes CO2. As we all of you know, they consume CO2, right? And what they give out to us in atmosphere is O2. So that's what they do. So, and if we see human beings, what they do, they intake O2 and they give away CO2. Isn't it interesting? So now if you see both oxygen, carbon, which it is such a our survival of our life depends on oxygen, and survival of plants depend on carbon dioxide. So, and if you see this carbon and oxygen, they both are non-metals. So in short, I can say that survival of life depends on non-metals, isn't it? So that is what non-metals are, such a important to understand and study about non-metals. And not only that, if you see the rockets, the fuel will not burn until the oxygen is present there. So the combustion of fuel is only possible in presence of oxygen. That's the reason whenever there is some fire, we always try to cut oxygen supply to that. Like when we are putting water or we are putting sand, what we are exactly doing? We are actually stopping the supply of oxygen to that place where the fire is. So oxygen is very important for combustion also. Without that, fuel will not burn only. And not only that, if you see the whole atmosphere, the nitrogen is 78%, oxygen is 20.9%, and all these, the major gases which form our atmosphere, air, it is all non-metals, nitrogen and oxygen. So, you see, this is everywhere. And not only that, presence of nitrogen in atmosphere, even the nitrogen is very important for growth of plants. It's very important for growth of plants. And there are many others also, like helium or hydrogen. You might have seen in your childhood these balloons. You might have seen these these balloons. This is also non-metal. So, and there are obviously many other also, if you can, we can just jot down some, like there is coal. What is coal? It's a carbon. And then there is diamond. It is also a form of carbon. It's a allotropy of carbon. And then graphite, it's also allotropy of carbon. So there are so many, if you see, there are so many uses or so many where non-metal is present. And not only that, if you might have seen swimming pools, they put chlorine there, chlorine in the water, so that it remains clean. And what is chlorine? Chlorine is again a non-metal. It's a non-metal. And not only that, it is also used in the preparation of antiseptic, like iodine. You might have we every day consume this iodine salt. So this is again a non-metal. So these non-metals play a very prominent role in our day-to-day life. Our survival depends on them. So that is the importance of non-metals. And let's also see about the history of non-metals. Like we saw the history of metals, similarly it is very interesting to see the history of non-metals. So the non-metals, only prehistorical time, only one non-metal was discovered, carbon. And you may be surprised, like if you see the metals, they were discovered, gold was discovered, after that silver, copper, they all were discovered. Obviously there was some time, lot of time gap, but it was getting discovered. But if you see the non-metal, only carbon was discovered prehistorical time. There is a reason, because the carbon, most of the carbon, if you see the oxygen, nitrogen, they are all in the air. You can't see them. So that is the one reason, why they were discovery of metals. Discovery of metal were easy than discovering of non-metals. And after carbon, came phosphorus were discovered in 13th century, and it was mostly used in explosives. We'll discuss it later. And obviously, after that, there were a lot of other non-metals which were discovered, like hydrogen was discovered by Henry Cavendish. And then oxygen, such an important, we can't survive without oxygen. It was discovered by Anthony Lavoisier in 1774. If you see, it's not that far. So, and then after that, nitrogen was discovered by Daniel Rutherford, and then chlorine, Carl Wilhelm, and then sulfur was again discovered by Anthony. And then these were all about discoveries about that. And then this which you can see right now on the screen, this is known as periodic table. All elements are classified in that, in these, all these are classified in this. We'll study this in detail, and I will tell you why this is known as periodic table, how it was came, who was the first person who started classifying them. Our subject matter is not about right now to discuss our periodic table. I just want to show you that if you see, the metals are present in more in number. That is why I'm showing more in number. And if you see non-metals, they are very less compared to metals. But still, what I want to show you, they non-metals dominate. Maybe they may be present in less in quantity, like less in numbers, but the quantity amount where non-metals are present around us is huge. Let us see that. Like if you see the the earth crust consists of 5 main elements like oxygen, calcium, iron, aluminum. And if you see, 50% of earth's crust is made from oxygen. And what is oxygen? If you see, oxygen comes in it is a non-metal. And you may be surprised how come oxygen is 50%. Obviously, if you see, our whole earth is 70% of water. And what is water? It's H2O. So most of these, 50% is present is oxygen. And what to speak of that, our human body consists of 3 main elements: oxygen, hydrogen, and carbon. And all these 3 are what? Non-metals. So although in periodic table they may look less in number, but they are very prominent, or they're present in huge in atmosphere, even in our own body, as we saw. So just to recap, what we discussed is about metals, history of metals, and just to recap, just pay attention. Recap is, we discussed today about non-metals. We discussed about the how it's present everywhere, and how we also saw the definition of non-metal, the substance which are electro negative. They are electronegative in nature. So we study that also. They are electronegative in nature. Why they are electro? They have tendency to gain electron. That's why they are electronegative. And we saw some examples, and then we saw some exception also, which is bromine, which is liquid. And then we also study that how non-metal, they are like our survival of depend on them. Like we saw oxygen, carbon dioxide, how these some gases are like important for our survival. And then we also saw the some history of non-metals, where carbon was discovered prehistorical times. And then we also saw, although they may look less in number in periodic table, but they are abundantly in our atmosphere or in our own body. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any queries, you can ask us on comment section, or you can send your doubts to our WhatsApp number also. Thank you very much once again. Hare Krishna.